Okay. Take about another 30 seconds and just think about this ideal future scenario where you feel this way instead. How could that happen? Try to picture it in your mind. All righty. So let's continue. And for any of you who struggled, as I said, very, very common to struggle with this. We're so wired to focus on what we don't want. We're so wired that way. It can be very difficult to know what we do want because often we know what we want to stop. We know, well, I don't want this and I don't want that. And that's typically how we think. But what we do want is not typically the opposite of what we don't. So this is really a helpful exercise. And honestly, it's why some people stay stuck in their change because they can't figure out what it is they really want. All right, so that was the first step here, aligning vision and values. And now we're going to go to step 2, which is cultivating the beliefs. So once you know what you want and you're inspired and motivated to move towards it, now we need to line up your beliefs to help get you there. And the coaching elements, again, this is beliefs and knowledge. Knowledge is a belief you think over and over becomes a truth. Knowledge is a series of truths, and so these are all related. And I want to talk about this tree metaphor that I created about what drives behavior. And apologies, this slide, I did this myself, and it's a little hard to read. I'm going to get a better graphic. But if you think about yourself as a tree or your client as a tree, what gets presented on the outside or what you typically want to work on are the behaviors that show up. So for example, I spend within my means. I struggle in relationships. I'm dependable. I overeat. I'm a high achiever. I avoid conflict, right? And we think of these in that arbitrary way, as I said before, as positive and negative behaviors. So you might think I'm a high achiever is positive, but you know what? Sometimes that can be a real negative. It can cause you to miss all kinds of other things in your life. And same thing with every one of these. This is back to everything being arbitrary. But the idea is that we have all these behaviors, but they're on the outside surface. It's what shows up. Now, underneath it, this is where a little tricky to read. So towards just below the surface, we have weak habits, surface beliefs, weak skills, right? That are on the surface. And then a little deeper, we have our stronger habits. We have our stronger beliefs. We have skills. We have knowledge. And when you go really deep to the base of the tree, we have core habits and core beliefs. And these drive everything. This is what I have found to be one of the greatest accelerators for personal change, and particularly the core belief arena. There's a whole lot of things out there, and I've not been able to find anybody who's really sort of nailed it in. And I just feel because of my experience and having worked with so many people that I have seen enough of the core beliefs show up enough times. These are really solid. Typically, if you work one of these 4, that's going to really have a huge impact. So I'm worthy and I matter is a core one. I'm lovable and I belong is 2. My life is meaningful is 3. And I'm physically safe is the last one. And honestly, the meaningful one, it doesn't even typically, usually people start here thinking that's what it is and they end up in these 2. These 2 drive almost everything. And so what happens, let's say somebody comes in or you are, let's pick a negative one. Okay, I struggle in relationships. So somebody comes in and they're like, I struggle in relationships. Well, immediately you start looking, well, how does that play out? Well, this happens and this happens and this happens. And here you are working up at the surface of the tree. But if you dive in, you're going to find, well, I've got these habits. I avoid people. I don't like to talk on the phone or this kind of thing. So you could work here, right? That's a little deeper work. But if you go right down to the core and you dive down to the belief and you work on and typically sometimes there's a little of both here, right? But you pick the one that's the biggest one. So let's say it's that I'm worthy and I matter. Well, now all of a sudden, this person feels more worthy. And what I have seen over and over, which is just amazing, when you work here, next thing you know, the relationships just improve, but so does everything else. All of a sudden, they start spending differently. They start becoming more dependable. Their eating gets in check. Everything shifts because these core beliefs drive everything on some level. So when you work at this level, it's a huge accelerator in terms of the change process. Now, in this class, we're not going to have opportunity to go into these deep core beliefs, obviously, but in the class we do. So just to understand in terms of an accelerator and how we think about change and driving behavior, when you work at this level, it's really huge. Now, a lot of times, a client may not want to do that, and you can work up here, and people do it every day, and you can make improvement. I can work up at the surface, I can improve relationships, and that's fine. And honestly, clients are very happy with that. So this is just really transformational work when you work down here. So I've got the exercise now for all of you to try to help you shift your beliefs, cultivate the positive belief that you need to make this change and open you to new possibilities. There's a number of ways to do this, and one of the ways is by asking questions that help you to reframe. So there's two here. So you can pick one, whichever one feels more appropriate to your situation. So the first one is past success. Think of a time in the past when you were able to successfully handle a similar situation to this one that you're working on now. What did you do, and what were the factors that led to your success? Or maybe you had this problem before and you were dealing fine with it, or something similar, or maybe it's just a piece of what you're trying to address now, but some kind of past success that's relevant to what you're doing now. Or the second one, just because we don't have time for both, is the role model question. Think of someone who is being or doing what you want, and you may not like or agree with anything else about this person. How do you imagine they think, and what do they do differently that creates success? What can you learn from them? All right. So I'm going to go ahead again, and oh my gosh, it's so quiet. It's hard to get used to. I'm so grateful for the people who have videos on, because I feel like I can see there's a live person. Thank you. And I'm not just talking to a screen, sometimes wondering if I've been on silent for the last 10 minutes. Okay, so everybody just take a minute, answer one of these questions, and I will, and if you have a question about this, feel free to unmute or to raise your hand or to put something in the chat. Otherwise, I'll be quiet again. Hey, Gay. Okay. All right, go ahead now and pick one of the questions and take a minute to answer that. Okay, take another 30 seconds and finish up answering your question here. All righty. And you can see how you could continue to go into these questions even deeper. And there's other things as well. But hopefully that's helping you to begin something shifted for you. And if not, you can come back and try again, or maybe you need a different question. But there's always a way to find another perspective that gives you some kind of insight and gives you some kind of a shift. And that's a core part of what this step 2 is all about, is helping the client or help you look at things in a different way so that you now have the beliefs you need. You now feel confident, or you feel like this is possible for you, or that you can do this. Those beliefs are really essential, because when you try to take action without having the beliefs lined up, it doesn't work, or that's part of why people fall back. All right, so that's the first 2 steps. So now at this point, you have this vision, you know what you want. You've lined up the beliefs to believe that you can get it, to believe that it's possible. And now, well, what the heck do we do, right? And this is what we love in our culture, is action. So we talk about inspiring behavior experiments. This is our version of action. And habits are part of this as well, building habits, but it all begins with behaviors, with starting new behaviors to shift what you're actually doing. So this step, inspiring behavior experiments, is about taking small, informed, inspired, experimental step forward. Let me explain what that is. So small, first of all, it's about tiny steps. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this by now with tiny habits and all this thing, that they're much more effective. And truly that is the only real way if you're doing long-term sustainable change. And if any of you are, you know this. And otherwise, people think, oh, I can take a big step, and that just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So low bar, something you can fit easily into your daily life, high chance of success. When the behavior experiments we suggest in the program, none of them take more than 15 minutes a day, because it gets too big then. And even that can be too big sometimes. But you want to keep it small and something that's manageable. The second thing is informed. Now, often we ask the client, and I'm going to ask you to come up with their own ideas, which is great. But we also have a whole host of things that we know work really well to be able to suggest. So when you are a coach and you know where that client is in that change process, and you know at that point, here are the things you could do that would most likely accelerate your results, that's tremendously value added. And then when you take into account that client's style, now you've really got something that's it has a very high chance of success. The third thing is inspired. This is not about discipline. Discipline doesn't work. And you can do it for short. That's why people yo-yo diet, right? You can do anything for a couple weeks, but that energy is not sustainable. It has to be something you're really inspired to do. And some of that is part of the upfront process. But you have to be motivated. And then experimental, keeping it light, no pressure, playfulness. Your brain freaks out when you try to do something new. The brain's like, no, we don't do it this way. And this is dangerous for our survival. So you've got to keep this part of this small step too. You got to give your brain a chance to catch up to you. That's part of why those big steps don't work. And also, when it's kind of light and playful, it's like, then your brain's like, hey, this is fine. And also, you don't know what's going to work till you try. And so you've got to experiment. You got to figure out what works. We don't know what works till we get out there and do it. We can think. Sometimes we're right. Very often we're not. That's another whole interesting thing. We're very bad at estimating a lot of things about the future. And there's a whole book, Stumbling on Happiness, that I love, where he talks all about that. And this is stuff we incorporate as well.